He did not climb those stairs to save her. He climbed them because Marin Alder kept the only true record of everything the family had ever done, and Corwin Rask had come to believe she had finally sold it. 2 nights before, an accord that would bind 2 dynasties, in blood and money, the one person who never missed a morning had vanished. When he found her at last, alone in the dark and weeping without a sound, what she whispered did not just unmake his careful world, it ended the accord before dawn. Earlier that day, Corwin Rask stood in the center of a room built to look like peace. The atrium of the Lark Hall had been dressed for the signing. Pale stone, tall, cold windows, white orchids in iron urns that cost more than a working man earned in a year. Corwin stood beneath the high skylight in a dark gray suit, cut close enough to hide the holster he had never removed. Not for a fitting, not for a funeral, not for this. He kept his hands loose at his sides and his face still. Stillness was the first thing his father had taught him. A calm man looks like a man who has already won. He had spent 15 years teaching the city to believe he was a businessman. The suits helped. So did the club memberships, the clean company names, and the fund his people ran for the River Widows. Beneath all of it, he was exactly what his father had been, and his father before him, and the city knew it the way it knew the tide. Men who owed the Rask family did not sleep well. Men who crossed it did not sleep at all. Around him people moved who did not know how near they stood to violence. Florists, a lighting man on a ladder, a young woman with a clipboard reciting the order of the evening as though it mattered. In 2 nights, the Rask family and the Haldane family would set their names to a single page, and the river, the yards, the bonded houses, all of it would run beneath one flag. It was not a marriage of love. It was a merger sealed with a ring. Corwin had agreed to it, the way he agreed to most things coldly, because the numbers were sound. He should have felt something close to triumph. Instead, the room felt airless, and his eyes kept drifting to the wrong place. Against the far wall stood a narrow table where the family's records were meant to sit through the signing. Every ledger, every deed, and every quiet arrangement that made the Rask name mean what it meant. On any other day, Marin Alder would already be standing beside that table. She arrived before he did and left after he had gone, a small, still figure in gray, who never raised her voice, and never once, in 6 years, got a single figure wrong. He had never seen that table without her behind it. The emptiness of it now was so wrong it looked staged. Corwin looked at that emptiness longer than he meant to. Something cold turned over in his chest. Mr. Rask. Ambrose Kester crossed the marble with the unhurried walk of a man who had buried 2 generations of Rasks and expected to bury a third. He was old now, silver at the temple, warm around the eyes, and Corwin had loved him. The way a son loves the uncle who first set a blade in his hand. Ambrose laid a palm on his shoulder. You are scowling at the flowers. The Haldane will think you are having doubts. Where is my archivist? It was not a question. Ambrose's smile did not move, but something behind it did. Miss Alder sent word she was unwell. A day, perhaps 2. Nothing that cannot keep until after the signing. He squeezed once and let go. Let her rest, Corwin. After Thursday, she can catalogue the whole world if it pleases her. You have larger things to hold in mind this week than one tired woman. Corwin said nothing, but he knew, the way he knew the weight of his own gun in the dark, that Marin Alder had never in 6 years sent word that she was unwell. She did not take days. She did not rest. She had once stood at his shoulder through a 9-hour negotiation with a fever that left her the color of ash, corrected a forged figure no one else had caught, and then quietly been sick in the corridor, where she believed no one could see. Someone had sent that word for her, or someone wanted him to believe she had. He turned from the flowers and the light and the pleasant lie of the room, and for the first time that morning, he felt entirely awake. Ondine Haldane found him before he could leave. She came across the atrium in ivory and cold gold. Her dark hair drawn back so severely it looked like it must hurt, her heels striking the stone in a slow and even rhythm. She was beautiful in the way of expensive things kept behind glass, beautiful and cared for, and wholly untouched by the world that paid for her. Corwin had met her 4 times. He could not have told you the color of her eyes, without looking. "You moved the toast," she said, without greeting. "I had the sequence set. My father speaks, then Ambrose, since you have no father to speak for you, then the rings, then the toast. You moved the toast to the end, did I?" Corwin said. "Someone did." She studied him the way a buyer studies a horse for soundness. "You seem distracted, and I need you. Present on Thursday. 300 people will watch 2 houses become one. If you stand there wearing the face of a man at a graveside, they will talk. Let them talk." "They will talk about weakness," Ondine said, "and weakness is expensive." She smoothed an invisible crease from his lapel, a gesture of ownership rather than warmth. "My father did not fly the length of the country to watch you brood over a clerk. He came to see the river handed across a table. He has wanted that river a long time, Corwin, longer than you have been alive. Do not give him cause to think the Rask family cannot keep its own house in order." There it was, small and sharp, and Corwin filed it away without letting it reach his face. Warwick Haldane had wanted the river a long time. A man did not spend years wanting a partnership. He wanted like that, only for a thing. He meant to take whole. "What did you say," Corwin said instead, "about a clerk?" "Ambrose told me. Your little record-keeper has run off sick 2 days before the most important night of both our lives." She lifted one shoulder in a small and elegant shrug. "So replace her. Hire 3 of her. You pay a single woman to mind your paperwork as though she were minding the crown jewels." He looked at Ondine, then, truly looked, at the flawless, untroubled surface of her, at the way nothing in her life had ever cost her a thing. And he understood, with a clarity that unsettled him, that she did not know what Maren Alder was. None of them did. Maren was not a clerk, she was the memory of the family. She kept the true book, the one that never touched a screen, the record of every debt and every grave, written in a hand so small and even, it looked printed by machine. She knew which magistrate accepted envelopes and which accepted only silence. She knew where the bodies of the business lay buried, because she had, without a word of complaint, filed the paper that covered them. She had sat through a room of shouting Haldane men the winter before, men built like doors, and never once lifted her pen, and asked them at last, quite politely, to lower their voices, because she was counting and they were making her lose her place. In 6 years she had asked Corwin for nothing. She had never raised her voice, never missed a morning, and had never once, not one single time, spoken his given name aloud. She said, "As you like, Mr. Rask," and the world stayed in its order. If Maren was gone, one of 2 things was true. She had at last decided to sell the memory of the Rask family to whoever paid the most. Or something had reached into his careful world and lifted her out of it, and he had been too slow, too pleased with his flowers and his numbers, to notice. Neither thought would let him breathe. "Send one of your men," Ondine was saying. "This is beneath you." "It is exactly at my level," Corwin said, and he walked away from his own wedding rehearsal while his bride was still speaking. Sten was waiting by the cars. He had driven for the family since before Corwin took the chair, a broad and quiet man who asked most of his questions with his eyebrows, which he raised now as Corwin came down the club steps into the gray afternoon. "Miss Alder," Corwin said. "When did she last come in?" "Day before yesterday." Sten did not need to check. "Left late. I offered to run her home. She said she would walk." A pause. "She always says she will walk. Get me her address." Sten's jaw shifted. "Boss, I have it already. Head office keeps it." He hesitated, and the hesitation told Corwin more than the words. "It is the Pharaoh's, Dray Lane. Down the dead end past the old dye works." Corwin stopped with his hand on the car door. He paid Maren Alder well. better than well. 6 years of loyalty, and not one raise she had ever asked for, so he had raised her himself, twice, until she earned more than men who carried guns for him. He paid her enough to hold rooms in any clean quarter of the city, somewhere with a porter at the door and a lock that worked. The Pharaoh's was not a clean quarter. It was 3 streets of condemned brick, where the lamps stayed dark because someone always shot them out, where the only callers were collectors, and now and then, a body. He had sent men into the Pharaoh's to do things he never said aloud. Not once had he imagined it was where she slept. Why would she live there? He said, half to himself. If he paid her enough for a clean life, then the money went somewhere, and it was not going to her. Sten had no answer, and Corwin got into the car, with the question turning in him like a key that would not quite fit its lock. They pulled into traffic, and the city began its slow change around them, glass and clean stone, giving way to shutters and rust and standing water. Corwin sat with a cold thing growing behind his ribs, and against his will he remembered. 6 days ago, his office, late, Marin at the corner of his desk with the evening's papers, waiting for his signature as she always did. He had signed without reading, as he always did, because her word had long been steadier than his own eyes. And he had noticed in the idle way a man notices weather, that her wrist was bound in a clean white bandage she had not worn that morning, and that she held the pen a little wrong because of it. He had opened his mouth to ask. Then his phone had rung, some small, nothing to do with the accord, and by the time he looked up, she had gathered the papers and gone, silent as ever, and he had let the question die because it was easier than the answer. It was not the first thing he had failed to ask her. There had been a morning she came in walking with great care, as though something in her ribs had been moved and set wrong. There had been a week in high summer when she wore her collar buttoned to the throat. Each time he had told himself she was a private woman, and that her privacy was a courtesy he owed her, when the truth was plainer and worse. He had not wanted to know. Knowing would have cost him attention. And every scrap of his attention that season had belonged to the accord. Ambrose told me she sent word she was ill, Corwin said. Through the office. No word came through the office. Sten's eyes stayed on the road. I would have logged it. I log everything that comes for you. Nothing came. For a long moment, Corwin did not move. The lie sat in the car with them, plain and ugly and impossible to unsee. Ambrose Kester, who had held him upright at his father's grave, who had taught his young hands to be steady on a trigger, had looked him full in the face this morning and set a story in his mouth that no living person had sent. There was only one reason a man built a lie so careful: to buy time, to keep someone from looking in a certain direction until it was too late to matter. Faster, Corwin said very quietly. Sten drove faster. And Corwin Rask, who had spent his whole ordered life refusing to run toward anything at all, felt the first true fear he had known in years, and did not yet know whether it was fear for her or fear of what he would find at the end of Dray Lane. Dray Lane was not so much a street as a wound the city had stopped tending. The car crawled the last stretch at a walking pace, because the road had given up on being a road. Cobbles heaved out of the mud like broken teeth. On either side the buildings leaned in, their windows blind with boarding, their doorways stuffed with the gray nests of people who had nowhere warmer to be. No lamp burned. The only light came from the car itself, 2 pale cones, swimming with rain, and at the very end of the lane, high up, a single yellow square in the black face of the old dye works. That is it, Sten said. The dye works. Nobody has run it in 20 years. He brought the car to a stop and left the engine running. There are rooms at the top, a foreman's flat, the agent calls it. She rents the top. He looked at the lit window, then at Corwin in the mirror. Boss, I do not like this place. Corwin did not like it either, though not for the reasons Sten meant. He had stood in worse. He had made worse. What turned his stomach was the arithmetic of it. He paid Marin Alder a wage that could have kept her in glass and warmth, and she had spent it, instead, on a cold square of nothing, at the top of a dead factory, at the end of a lane where the city sent its forgotten to rot. The money went somewhere. It had never gone to her. He got out into the rain, which had a chemical edge to it here, a ghost of the dyes soaked into the ground a generation ago, sharp and metallic on the back of the tongue. "Stay with the car," Corwin said. "Boss, if I am not down in a quarter of an hour, you may dislike this place all you like. Until then, the car." A shape peeled from the doorway nearest the works, an old woman wrapped in what might once have been a good coat, her face a map of the cold. She did not ask him for money. She had taken one look at his coat and chosen to be invisible. He stopped in front of her anyway. "The woman at the top," he said. "Gray coat, quiet." Her eyes moved over him, weighing. "You, another one," she said. Corwin went still. "Another one, 2 nights back. Men in a car like yours, only newer. Sat at the end of the lane with the engine running a long while. Then they went up." She sucked her teeth. "Went up polite, came down quick, and she has not put her light out since. Every night now. That little window, burning right through till morning. A body does not keep a light like that unless it is afraid of the dark coming in after it." Corwin reached into his coat and the old woman flinched, but what he brought out was folding money. He pressed it into her hand. "If a car like theirs comes to this lane again tonight, you saw nothing, and you heard less." She was already gone, folded back into her doorway. The money vanished as though it had never been. Corwin turned to the black mouth of the works. The door hung ajar on a broken chain. The ground floor was a cathedral of rust. Great iron vats stood in rows in the dark, tall as houses, their sides streaked with the dried blood of old colors. Chains hung from the black ceiling. The air was thick and still and cold enough to ache, and it carried that same chemical ghost. The breath of an industry that had poisoned this ground, and then died, and left the poison behind. Rain came through the broken roof in threads and rang softly on the iron. Corwin moved between the vats to the far corner, where a staircase of iron treads climbed the wall and vanished into the dark above. He kept his right hand loose and near his coat. The old habit, though he did not draw. If anyone had been left to watch, he would have known it by the grain of the silence, and this silence was only that of a dead place. He climbed. The treads were slick and rang under his weight, no matter how he set his feet, and he thought, with a cold and useless clarity, of Maren climbing these same stairs every night in the dark, alone, with her wrist bound, carrying whatever it was she carried. 6 years he had let her stand at the corner of his desk. 6 years, and he had never asked her a question whose answer might have inconvenienced him. He had believed that made him a considerate man. He saw now it had only made him a comfortable one. Near the top, the dark began to thin. A line of yellow light lay along the floor of the landing, spilling from beneath a door that stood a hand's width open. Corwin reached the last tread and listened. No voice, no movement, only the rain and the light, and a certainty settling in him cold and entire, that whatever waited past that door would divide his life into a before and an after. He set his palm flat against the wood and pushed it open. The room beyond was dark and cold, with the particular cold of a place that had never been warm. Corwin stood on the threshold and let his eyes find the shape of it. He had come up those stairs braced for one of 2 sights. He had half expected the soft rot of a woman who had been bought, good rugs and new glass, and the guilty comfort of Haldane money laid down over her betrayal. And he had half expected the wreckage of a woman who had run, drawers hanging open, hangers stripped, the litter a person leaves behind when they take everything that matters and go. He found neither, and the neither of it stopped him where he stood. There was almost nothing in the room. A narrow iron bed against one wall, made up as tight as a soldier's, a single thin blanket, and no second, 1 chair. A basin. A ring of paler paint on the boards, where a stove had once stood before someone sold it for the coin. No pictures on the walls. No mirror. Not one soft thing, not one object kept for the plain pleasure of keeping it. Nothing in the whole cold square that said a person had tried to build a life here rather than only outlast the nights. He searched the room for her, the way you search a face for a name, and it gave him nothing back. There was no trace of Marin Alder in it at all, no photograph, no letter, no small private thing, as though she had spent 6 years making certain that if a stranger ever stood where he stood now, they would learn nothing of who she was, or what she loved, or where the rest of her wage had gone. But in the center of the room, under a single bare bulb, was order. A long table, salvaged and scrubbed pale, and on it, ranked and squared and perfect, the work, her ledgers, the family's true book in its worn black cover. Folders aligned to the table's edge as though a ruler had walked their spines. 6 years of the Rask family's every secret, kept not in a vault behind steel, but here, at the top of a dead factory, guarded by a woman with a single blanket and a broken wrist. She had taken nothing for herself. Whatever her wage had bought in this world, it had bought not one comfortable thing in this room. She had not sold him. The certainty of it arrived all at once, and it shamed him, because some cold and honest corner of him had wanted her to be a traitor he understood. A traitor he knew how to answer, with a gun and a grave and a night's clean sleep after. This he did not know how to answer at all, and standing over her ledgers he understood, too, what the men had climbed these stairs to take. Not money. There was no money here to take. They had come for the record itself, for the black book and its long record of proof. Because somewhere in that small, even hand was written a thing that could put a man in the ground. She had not fled from Corwin, with the family's secrets. She had been guarding them with her body, in a cell, in the cold, while whoever wanted him gone sent men up to persuade her out of them, went up polite, came down quick. He looked again at the one crooked folder and understood that she had not given the men what they came for. A woman with a single blanket had stood in this room and told the sort of men he himself sent into the Pharaohs that they could not have the thing they wanted. There were the other wrong notes in the order. The chair lay on its side against the wall and had not been righted. A drawer stood a finger open. She had put the room back the way she put everything back, patiently, exactly, all but the few small things that fear had let her miss. Across the room, a second door stood shut. It did not quite meet its frame, and along the seam of it lay a thin blade of light. From behind it came a sound at last, so faint he had climbed the whole dead works without once hearing it. Not a voice, not a sob, only the small broken catch of a breath being held and lost, held and lost, held and lost. The sound of a person weeping who had trained herself over long and private practice. Corwin crossed the room. He did not draw his gun. He set his hand against the second door, and for the space of one breath, he was more afraid of the thing behind it than he had ever been of any armed man in any dark room in his life. Then he opened it. Marin Alder sat on the floor of the little back room, with her spine against the wall and her knees drawn up to her chest, and she was crying. That was all of it. That was the whole of what waited behind the door, and it was enough to stop his heart. There was no blood, there was no gun trained on him from the dark. There was a small desk lamp turned down low, and a chair she had not taken, and the woman who had never once let him see her flinch, sitting on bare boards in the cold, with her face wet and her shoulders moving in that terrible contained way, weeping as though she had been at it a long time and had forgotten there was any other way to be. For a man who had built his whole life on holding still, Corwin found that he could not move. He had walked into rooms with the dead still cooling in them, and felt his pulse hold steady as a clock. He had watched men he had known for years beg for their lives, and felt nothing in himself he could not manage and set aside. The sight of Marin Alder, weeping alone in the dark, went into him like a thin blade slid between the ribs, quiet and complete, and something in the careful architecture of him cracked from top to bottom and did not knit back. She heard him then, her head came up, and for one raw, unguarded second, he saw the whole of what she had spent 6 years keeping off her face. The fear, the bone exhaustion, a grief with no floor beneath it. Then the old discipline came down, like a shutter dropped over a shop window. She dragged the heel of her hand hard across her eyes, furious with herself, and reached for the wall to gather her feet beneath her. Mr. Rask. Her voice came out wrecked, a ruin of the level quiet tone he had heard every working day for years. She got a palm flat to the wall and pushed, fighting to stand, fighting to make herself upright and presentable, fighting, of all the things in the world, to resume her post. I am sorry, you were not meant to see. Give me a moment and I will have the papers for you. Everything for the signing is in order. It is all on the table. I only need to— Stop, Corwin said. The figures are checked twice. If you will only give me a moment to Marin. Stop. She stopped. She stayed there, half risen against the wall, trembling with the effort of it, and the look on her face then was worse than the tears had been. It was the shame of the invisible woman who has finally been seen, and cannot bear it, and does not know how, to be a person in front of the man she has served, like furniture, for 6 silent years. Corwin crossed the little room and lowered himself onto one knee in front of her, slowly, the way a careful man comes near a hurt thing that might break itself trying to flee. Up close she was worse than the poor light had let him understand. There were violet hollows beneath her eyes, deep as bruises. Her lower lip had been split some days ago and had healed crooked. The bandage on her wrist was fresh, and there was another he had not known about at her hairline, and the guarded way she held her side said she had been hurt there too, and recently she was shaking, and not only from the crying. The room held no warmth in it at all, and her thin cardigan was no armor against the cold, and her lips had gone faintly blue at the edges. Corwin rose, shrugged out of his heavy coat in a single motion, and crouched again to settle it around her shoulders. It swallowed her whole. She went rigid at the sudden weight and warmth of it, and for a moment he thought she might push it off out of pure ingrained refusal to be given anything at all. Then her hands came up and gripped the lapels and dragged it closed at her throat, and she shut her eyes and a fresh spill of tears cut down her face, as though a kindness was the one thing in the world she had no defense left against. He did not reach for her. In 6 years he had never touched her, not so much as a hand at a door, and he understood, kneeling there in the cold, that he had no right to begin now without her leave. "Who?" he said, and his voice was not steady, and for once in his life he did not trouble to make it so. "Who did this to you?" And Marin Alder, who had never once asked him for a single thing, who had never raised her voice, who had carried the whole crushing weight of his world in her 2 small hands and her perfect silence, looked at him out of her ruined face, and did the thing he would remember for the rest of his life. She reached out, her cold hand closed around his wrist, over the fine dark wool of his sleeve, and gripped it the way a person grips the one solid thing in a room that has begun to tilt and go over. Her grip was cold and fierce, and it did not loosen. He looked down at her small hand on his arm, the bound wrist, the knuckles gone white with holding, and did not move it away. He would have let her break the bone before he moved it away. "You have to listen to me," she whispered. "You have to let me say all of it before you decide what I am, because once I say it, you are going to want to put a bullet in me, and you might be right to." Her fingers tightened. The tears ran and she let them, past, caring. "Now, they are going to kill you, on Thursday, at the signing, and it is my fault, because I have known for 11 days, and I was too afraid of you to come and say it to your face." It was the first time in 6 years she had ever spoken it. Not the name the city feared, his own. "Corwin," she whispered, "please." For a long moment Corwin did not speak. The lamp hummed. The rain went on against the high, broken windows of the works below them, and Marin Alder kept her cold hand fisted in the wool of his sleeve, as though letting go would send her over the edge of the world. "Tell me," he said, "all of it. From the beginning, so she told him. 11 days ago, she had been reconciling the accord papers against the true book, as she reconciled everything, line by line, because that was the one thing she had ever truly been for. And the numbers had not matched. The accord did not read like a marriage of two houses. Buried in the clean legal language, past the part any proud man would sign after a good dinner, were clauses that did not merge the Rask holdings with the Haldane holdings at all. They handed them across, signing authority over the river, the yards, the bonded houses, the clean company names, all of it routed on Corwin's own signature into instruments that answered to Warwick Haldane and to no one else. "You were not going to gain a partner on Thursday," she whispered. "You were going to sign your whole world into another man's hand, and thank him for the pen." She had thought, at first, that Warwick had simply written a greedy contract, the kind a clever lawyer smuggles past a vain man. Then she had gone, looking for how such a thing could ever be walked through the family without one of Corwin's own people raising a hand against it, and she had found Ambrose. Small things first, a meeting that appeared in no book but hers. A sum that left the accounts under the heading of the Widow's Fund and never reached a single widow. Then a message she was never meant to see because Ambrose still thought of her as furniture, a hand that filed and did not read. Ambrose Kester had promised the family to Warwick Haldane. He had promised to deliver it quiet and whole, and in return he would keep his place, the old and trusted counselor, the one man both houses could bear to leave standing when the smoke cleared. "How?" Corwin said. His voice had gone very soft, the way still water goes soft, just before it drops over a fall. At the signing, her breath shook. No weapons inside the Lark Hall. That was Ambrose's idea, put to you as a courtesy between families, a gesture of trust. Your men give up their guns at the door. The Haldane men keep theirs salted through the guests and the catering staff, faces you have never seen. You sign. The moment your name is dry, you are worth more dead than alive, because the paper has already done its work. Then it happens. You, and every man in that room still loyal to you, all at once, so that no one is left to argue the succession. They will lay it at the door of the river cruise. Some old quarrel got out of hand, and by morning, Ambrose is standing in the wreck of it with wet eyes, the last steady Rask hand, keeping the peace by finishing the very merger that killed you. She swallowed the grieving old man. Everyone trusts the grieving old man, and 2 nights ago they came here, Corwin said. It was not a question. They came because I got careless. Her free hand drifted to the bandage at her wrist. I had to be certain, so I went back into the routing records one last time, and Ambrose keeps a man in the counting house who watches which drawers open. He must have told them a hand had been in the wrong ledger. 2 of them came up those stairs. Polite, the way you are polite to a thing you have already decided to break. She said it flatly, the way she said everything, as though reading a column of figures aloud. They wanted the book. I told them there was no book but the one on the table, and that one holds nothing but flowers and seeding, and the price of the orchids. They did not believe me. But I have hidden worse than a ledger from harder men than those. And in the end they left empty-handed and furious, with nothing at all, because the only copy that can hang Ambrose Kester is up here. She touched her own temple, lightly. And they cannot cut it out of me without first knowing it is there. Why? Corwin said. Not the cold interrogation of before. Something rawer beneath it. You have known for 11 days. You had proof in your hand. Why did you not walk into my office and set it on my desk? The question broke something in her that the fear had left standing. Because I have always been afraid of you, she said simply. Not the way the city is afraid of you, worse. She would not look at him now. She looked at the coat around her shoulders, at her own bound wrist. 6 years ago the family gave an order. A man had seen a thing he was not meant to see. I was told to make the book show the matter had been settled, that he was gone. Her jaw worked. I made the book say it, and then I did not do the rest of it. I could not. He was 19 years old and he had a mother, and so I moved him instead, and I have paid every month since to keep him breathing somewhere far from here, under a name that was never his. That is where your wage goes, Corwin. Not to me. To a lie I have carried inside your own true book. For 6 years. She finally lifted her ruined face to his. So you see why I could not come to you? Every day of my life I have lived at the lip of a grave I dug myself. If I brought you proof of one man's treachery, you would only have looked harder at the person who found it, and you would have found mine first. Corwin was quiet for so long that the fear came flooding back into her face, the certainty that she had just talked herself into that grave at last. But he was not thinking of her lie. He was thinking of a Christmas 8 years gone, Ambrose Kester pressing a glass into his hand and calling him son. He was thinking of the weight of that same old palm on his shoulder, at the Lark Hall only, this morning, warm as ever, steering him so gently away from the empty table where she should have stood. He was thinking, with a cold that found no bottom, of how near he had come to signing his own name. Marin, he said at last, and his evenness was more terrible than any shout. Look at me, she made herself. You are not going into any grave. The only people who will need one after Thursday are the men who believed they could take what is mine, while I stood admiring the flowers. She let out a breath that was half a sob and half something else. Something like the first easing of a stone held long against her chest. You believe me, she said, and it was not quite a question. I have trusted your figures over my own eyes for 6 years, Corwin said. I am not about to stop on the one night they matter most. He reached out then, slowly, so that she could stop him if she wished, and closed his hand over the fist she still had knotted in his sleeve. Her fingers were like ice. He did not pry them loose. He simply wrapped his warmth around the cold of them until by degrees the terrible grip began to ease. The book says what you say, it says, Corwin told her. It always has. That is the whole of what you are to this family. The one hand we trust to write the truth down. If 6 years ago you decided a boy of 19 would live, then he lives. And the book was right, and I will hear nothing more about graves. He watched the disbelief move across her face, watched the thing she had braced so long to defend simply set aside like a weight lifted from a table. You kept a man alive against a direct order. I have ended men for less than a raised voice in the wrong room, and you are still the most loyal soul who has ever stood on Rask ground. Sit with that. I can wait. She sat with it. She turned it over and could find no trap in it, no cold price waiting at the bottom, and the absence of a price was so foreign to her that it frightened her nearly as much as the men on the stairs had. For 6 years she had made herself indispensable precisely so that she would never have to be forgiven anything, because a person who is never wrong is never in another's debt. And here was the one man she had feared above all others, holding out a pardon she had not earned and did not know how to take into her hands. She wept again, but it was a different weeping now. He crouched in front of her while she cried, and this time he did not hold himself back from it. He reached up and with a care that would have astonished every man who had ever feared him, brushed a strand of damp hair away from the cut at her hairline. The small human motion of one person tending another, and she went still beneath it the way a wary animal goes, still at a kindness it does not trust. He had spent his whole life learning the 100 ways to take a thing from a person. He was, he discovered, a poor and clumsy student of how to give one back. But he meant to learn it on her however long it took, because she had spent all those years giving and giving into a silence that had never once said thank you. Then, because there was a clock running on all of this, and it had already begun to turn, he stood. He crossed to the cold outer room and stood a moment over the long scrubbed table, over the accord papers she had prepared, squared to the edge, perfect to the last stroke. The instrument of his own quiet undoing made ready by the very woman it had been designed to bury beside him. He did not burn them. He had no need of the theater of it. He gathered them into one neat stack and turned them face down, and it was as simple and as final as lowering a lid. "There is no accord," he said. He did not say it to a telephone. He did not say it to Ondine Haldane, or to her father, or to any man he meant to frighten. He said it quietly, into the cold room, to the one person in the world who had bled to make it true. Not the one they wrote. It ended tonight on this floor, whatever paper anyone waves on Thursday. But he did not tear the signing down where the Haldanes might see it fall. He stood over the face-down papers and let the cold logic assemble itself, piece by piece, the way it always did once he stopped pretending to be a man of business. "Cancel now," loudly, and Warwick would know his knife had been seen, and a seen knife only moves faster. The Haldanes would run, or strike early, and Ambrose would melt into the gray with his warm smile untouched, to try again in a year from some other side. No. Let them keep believing the flowers still mattered. He began aloud to build it, and she watched the shape of it come together in the cold air between them. The Haldane men would search his people at the door and find them clean, exactly as Ambrose had arranged, exactly as Warwick expected. What no one would think to search was the catering. The men who carried the trays and poured the wine and stood along the walls like furniture. The men everyone in a room of powerful people learns not to see. Sten could put a dozen of their own into aprons by Thursday and walk them past the Haldane guns in plain sight, because arrogance never frisks the help. The whole trap depended on one belief that Corwin would come into that room blind and proud and outnumbered. He meant to give them a proud, blind fool, right up until the moment his name should have touched the paper. And then he meant to introduce them to the truth. "They think the room is theirs," Corwin said softly. "We are going to let them walk all the way into the middle of it, and then we are going to close the door." He went back to her. She had got herself upright against the wall, swaying, one hand pressed flat to her ribs, stubborn to the very end. "I can walk," she said, before he could open his mouth. "I know you can," Corwin said. "You have walked home to this place every night for 6 years, with your ribs like that, and never once, let me see. But those iron stairs are slick as wet glass, and if you go down them in the dark, then I will have carried a body out of here for nothing, and I did not come the length of this city for that." He waited. He understood. The first thing he had ever truly asked her leave for. "Let me." For a moment, the old refusal rose in her. The horror of being a burden that had kept her spine straight through every quiet violence of the last weeks. Then she looked at the man kneeling in the ruins of his own careful life, and something in her laid the weapon down. "All right," she whispered. "Then Corwin, the book. I cannot leave the book." "Sten already has it," he said. "And every folder off that table, and the papers you spent your last strength making perfect, for a signing that is never going to happen the way they wrote it. Nothing of yours stays in this place. You are not coming back to it." He lifted her. She weighed almost nothing, and that nothing enraged him more than anything Ambrose had done, that she had made herself so small while carrying so much. She turned her face into his shoulder out of the cold, and he carried her from the little room, past the face-down papers, down the black iron stairs, into the Cathedral of Rest, and out through the broken door into the rain, where Sten already stood with the car door open and his face carefully emptied of every question he had decided not to ask. Corwin Rask's house stood behind a high wall on the good side of the river, and in all her years of keeping its accounts, Maren had never set foot inside it. She had paid its gardeners and its glaziers and the man who came to tune a piano. Nobody played, and when she had pictured it at all, she had pictured somewhere cold and museum still, like its owner. She was not wholly wrong. But there was a fire lit in the room. He carried her to, a real fire, and the heat of it struck her like an open hand, and she understood that she had not been properly warm in longer than she could name. She sat in the borrowed warmth of a stranger's house, wrapped in a coat that smelled of him and a blanket that was thick, and found that her hands had begun to shake now that they no longer had to be steady. That was the cruelty of safety, she thought. It let you feel, at last, exactly how frightened you had been. A woman appeared, gray-haired, unsurprised by anything the world could still offer her, who had plainly kept this man's father before him. Corwin said only, "She is to have whatever she wants, and no one is to know she is here. Not the house, not the men, no one." The woman nodded and went, and came back with broth and warm bread and a blanket that was not thin, set them down without a single question, and left again. Maren looked at the broth, and could not for a moment make her hands move toward it. It had been a long time since anyone had set food before her that she had not first counted the cost of. "Eat," Corwin said from the other chair. "That is not an instruction I am prepared to lose." She ate. He watched her do it and did not pretend otherwise, and something in the plain fact of being watched over, rather than only watched, loosened a knot in her she had not known she was carrying. When the bowl was empty, she reached out of 6 years of iron habit for the folder Sten had carried up from the car, the true book resting on top of it, because there was work in it, and work was the one language she had ever trusted. Corwin leaned across and laid his hand flat on the worn black cover before she could open it. "Not tonight," he said. "There is a great deal to." "There is. And you are going to be the one who does most of it, because there is no one else alive who can, which is precisely why you are going to sleep first, so that when we take the Larkhall apart, you do it with a clear head and not a fever." He did not lift his hand. "I spent 6 years letting you carry this alone, because it cost me nothing to allow it. That account is closed. Tonight you rest, and I keep the watch. It is my turn." She stared at him. It was the strangest sentence anyone had spoken to her in her adult life. "And after?" she heard herself ask. The word came out before she could stop it, foolish and small. "After Thursday, if it works. What happens to me after?" He looked at her a long moment. "You have never once asked me a question about yourself," he said. "In 6 years. Not a raise, not a day off, not a single kindness. And the first one you ask is what becomes of you when the danger is done." Something moved in his face that she had no name for. "I do not know yet, but I know it is not that room in the dye works, and it is not a desk in a corridor, and it is not the edge of my life you have been living on like a ghost that is afraid of the light. Whatever, after there is, you will be in the middle of it, not the border. That much I can promise you tonight." She had no answer for him. She had never, in her whole careful life, permitted herself to imagine an after at all. There was a knock, and Sten put his head in, and his face was no longer empty. "Boss, Ambrose is on the house line for you. 3rd time now. Says he must speak with you before morning. Family business. Cannot wait." A pause. "And a car came slow past the front wall 20 minutes ago and did not come back. Newer, none of ours." The room went very still, so it had already begun. Ambrose, feeling the first thread pull loose, reaching out in his warm old voice to learn how much the proud fool had guessed. The car in the dark, making sure of the ground. Corwin felt the last of the businessman leave him like a breath, let go, and what remained was the thing his father had been, and his father before him. "Tell Ambrose I am asleep," Corwin said. "Tell him I am worn out from the fittings and full of doubts about the flowers, and that I will see him at the Larkhall on Thursday, as arranged, and that everything is exactly as he has built it." Sten's eyebrows rose a fraction, the only surprise he would permit himself, and then understanding moved in behind them, and something that on a harder face might have been a smile. "Double the watch on the wall, quietly. And bring me the real guest list for Thursday. The catering crew, the servers, every name Warwick has salted into that room. We have 2 days." He looked at Maren and her. "No one comes near this room but you and me. If that ever changes, You come to me first. Whatever the hour, boss, Sten said, and was gone. When the door closed, the quiet came back. But it was a different quiet than the one she had lived in so long. That quiet had been the held breath of a woman waiting to be found out. This one had a man on the other side of it, awake, standing between her and the dark. She did not know what to do with it. She had never in her life been the thing another person kept watch over. She had always been the watcher, the one who saw everything and was seen by no one, and she found that being seen was a great deal more frightening than the men on the stairs had been, and a great deal harder to survive. 2 days, she said. 2 days, Corwin agreed. Sleep. Tomorrow you are going to hand me every knife in that room, one at a time, and tell me exactly where each one is pointed. She slept the better part of a day, and woke to a gray light and a fire someone had built up while she was under, and for one lost moment did not know where in the world she was. Then it came back, all of it, the dye works and the whisper, and the man who had knelt in her cold shame and told her she would not go into any grave. She lay still and let her heart slow, and understood that she was for the first time in 11 days not afraid. She had forgotten, in 11 days of living at the edge of a knife, what it was to wake without her first thought being a reckoning of who knew what and how long she had left. She lay in the strange, soft bed and listened to the house come awake around her, a kettle somewhere, a low voice, the ordinary sounds of a place where people were safe, and she let herself for the length of a few slow breaths. She found Corwin in a long, quiet room, with the true book already open on the table before him, waiting for her the way a man waits for the only doctor who can read the scan. He had not touched it past the cover. He did not know how to read her hand, and he knew it, and that, too, was new. "Show me," he said, so she showed him. She turned the guest list beside the book and went down it with one finger, and the room she built out of names was worse than he had feared. Warwick had not salted a shooter or two into the Lark Hall. He had salted a dozen. 3 among the guests, minor Haldane cousins, with clean records and concealed guns. 9 among the catering, the men who would pour and carry and stand along the walls, exactly as she had said. She knew them by the payments, small consulting fees routed through a linen company that had never once laundered a napkin, and she recited the amounts from memory, without glancing at the page, because the page was only a copy of a ledger she carried whole behind her eyes. Corwin watched her do it, watched the small, even voice lay out how they meant to be rid of him as calmly as she might read him the week's tariffs, and understood a thing he should have understood years before. He had thought her useful. Useful was a word for a good tool. What sat across the table from him was not a tool at all. It was a mind that had quietly held the whole weight and shape of his empire in trust, alone and unthanked, and had chosen, when the moment came, to spend itself protecting a man who had never once asked her name at a Christmas. "And here is the one that will hurt," she said, and set her finger on a name inside his own house. Callan. Corwin went still. Callan had carried a gun for the family for 9 years. Callan had taken a bullet meant for Corwin's father in a stairwell, and never asked to be thanked for it. "Ambrose bought him in the spring," Marin said gently, as though the gentleness could soften it. "A gambling debt, the same sickness that has ruined better men. Callan is the one who sold your people on giving up their weapons at the door. A gesture of trust," he told them, "from a captain they would follow into fire. They will walk in clean because Callan asked them to, and they will die clean for the same reason, unless we take him out of the picture before he can give the signal." 9 years, Corwin said mostly to himself. "He carried my father down that stairwell with a bullet in his own shoulder, and would not let me pay the doctor." He was quiet a moment. "Ambrose did not just buy a gun. He went through my house and found every man with a crack in him and poured himself into it. I will be a long time finding all the cracks." "You will not have to find them alone," Marin said, before she could think better of it, and then looked down at the book, as though it had spoken and not her. They built it across the length of that gray afternoon. The two of them bent over the book like conspirators, which was what they had become. The Rask men would surrender their guns at the door, every one, because to do otherwise was to warn Ambrose that the game had changed, let Callan believe he had delivered them lambs. But the catering for the Lark Hall ran through a company the family half owned, a fact Warwick had overlooked, because he thought of Marin as a filing clerk, and not as the woman who knew who owned what, down to the last hidden share. Warwick had salted 9 of his own men into the serving staff, and never wondered who filled the rest of it. By Thursday morning, every apron in that room that did not cover a Haldane gun would cover a Rask one, so that each of Warwick's 9 would pour his wine with one of Sten's men at his shoulder, close enough to stop it before it cleared a coat. When the moment came, the only guns in that room that mattered would be in the hands of men who answered to Corwin. It turns on one thing, she warned him. If any of the 9 are moved to a different post at the last hour, or if Warwick brings in a man who is not on this list, then a dozen of our own walk in blind, and it all goes wrong with the sides reversed and the cost just as high. You cannot go in there guessing. Someone has to see the room as it truly is in the moment, and match every living face against the book. She said it as a problem to be solved. She did not yet understand that she had just described her own place in what was coming. And Callan, Corwin said. Callan spends Wednesday night at a card room on Fell Street that he believes is a secret, Marin said. It is in the book. Everything is in the book. You will not have to hurt your own men to save them. You will only have to be the last one in that room still holding something, when every other soul believed the counting was already done. When it was built, and checked, and built again, the light had gone from the windows, and she was gray with the effort of it, swaying in her chair the way she had swayed against the dyeworks wall. Corwin reached across and closed the book under her hand. Enough, he said. It holds. You have handed me every knife in that room. There is still the Marin, her name, in his mouth stopped her, the way his did in hers now. You have not stopped moving since I found you on that floor. You are allowed to stop. He studied her, the violet under her eyes, the wrist she still favored, the small fierce engine of her that had run 6 years on fear and duty, and nothing warm at all. The boy, he said quietly, the one you saved. When this is done, he does not have to hide anymore. He comes home under my protection, or he stays gone with my blessing and my money instead of yours, whichever keeps him safest. Either way, you are done paying for a mercy that should never have cost you a single night in that cold. Do you understand me? She looked at him, and for a moment she could not speak at all, and it had nothing to do with silence being her habit. It was only that no one, in her whole guarded life, had ever offered to lift a weight off her without first weighing what it would buy them. He saw the disbelief, and did not press it. He reached across the table instead, and with the same unpracticed care he had shown at the dyeworks, turned her injured wrist over to look at the bandage, checking it the way a man checks a thing he means to keep. His hands were enormous and scarred and built for terrible work, and against her skin they were unbearably gentle. She held very still, and let him, and neither of them said a word. And the fire ticked in the grate, and it was the nearest thing to peace she had known in years. Thursday, she managed at last. Thursday, he agreed. You will be in the service passage behind the north wall, with eyes on the room and Dane beside you, who I would trust with my own throat. You know the faces. When the servers come in, you tell Sten which aprons are ours and which are Warwick's. Because in that light and that hurry I will not have time to guess wrong, and if it goes badly, if it goes to pieces in there and you hear it start to, you do not come out to find me. You take the book and you take Dane and you disappear and you live. That is the one order I have ever given you that I need you to obey. You would not obey it, he said, watching her face. I can see that you would not. He did not order it again. He had long since learned that Marin Alder did not bend to an order she disagreed with. She only let you believe she had. Then obey this much. If it goes wrong, you do nothing brave. Braveness is how the quiet ones die. You do the thing you have always done. You survive. And you remember. And you make the book tell the truth after. Can you promise me that? That, she said, I can promise. Thursday came clear and cold. The lark hall stood dressed exactly as it had been 2 mornings before, the pale stone and the white orchids and the tall windows, all of it arranged to look like peace. And Corwin walked into it in a dark suit with no gun beneath his arm for the first time in 15 years, and let the man at the door pat him down and find him clean. And felt more armed than he had ever been in his life. The room was already full. Warwick Haldane stood by the signing table with silver at his temples and satisfaction on his face. A patient man come to the end of a long patience. Undine was ice and pale gold at his side, and Ambrose Kester crossed the marble to meet Corwin with both hands out, and his warm old eyes shining, and put a palm on his shoulder exactly as he had 2 days before, and said, "There he is. There is my boy. You had me worried, Corwin. You seemed so far away all this week." "I was," Corwin said. "I am back now." Along the walls the servers stood with their trays. Corwin did not look at them too long. He let his eyes pass over the aprons the way a proud man's eyes pass over the help, and behind the north wall, in a dark service passage, with a book against her chest, Marin watched the same men through a gap in a service door and murmured to Sten which of them were carrying more than wine. 9 names. Sten's dozen already knew their marks. It was a quiet arithmetic, done in a whisper, in the dark, by the woman no one in that bright room remembered was alive. The ceremony began. Warwick spoke of 2 great houses and 1 great river. Ambrose spoke, in a voice thick with feeling, of the father who would have wept to see this day, and Corwin watched the old man lie about his dead father, with wet eyes, and understood, fully and at last, what it was he had come here to do. Behind the north wall, Marin pressed her eye to the gap, and felt her own pulse in her throat. She had lived this room in her mind 100 times in 2 days, every angle, every apron, but the mind's version had no smell of orchids in it, no warmth of crowded bodies, no Ambrose weeping true tears over a dead man whose living son he had sold. The real thing was so much nearer the edge. 1 wrong face, 1 server, moved at the last hour, and the careful arithmetic became a killing floor. She matched the aprons against the book, 1 by 1, and breathed each name to Sten, and did not let her hand shake, because a shaking hand was a luxury, and she had never once been able to afford one. Then the pen was laid on the table, and the accord beside it, 40 pages of Marin's careful preparation, and Warwick said warmly, "Shall we, Corwin?" and gestured him to the chair. Corwin sat. He drew the papers toward him. He uncapped the pen. Across the room he felt Callan shift his weight, the small readiness of a man who knows a thing is about to begin, and he let the moment stretch until it was almost unbearable, until Ambrose leaned in with his hand warm on the back of the chair. Then Corwin set the pen down, unmarked, and stood. "Before I sign my whole world across this table," he said, and his voice was not loud, but it went into every corner of that stone room, "I should like to read 1 page that is not in the accord. My archivist prepared it. You remember my archivist. Ambrose told you all she had run off sick." He nodded, once toward the north wall. "What happened? Then happened in the time it takes to sign a name." The aproned men along the walls set down their trays, and the trays were not empty, and the 9 Haldane servers were seized from behind and stripped of their hidden weapons before a single one had cleared his coat. It was not loud, and it was not long. Sten had chosen men who did not need it to be. In the space of 3 breaths, every concealed weapon in that room had passed into Rosk's hands, and the 3 Haldane cousins were pinned and disarmed against the pale marble, and Callan stood alone in the center of it all with his own weapon half drawn and nowhere on earth to point it, and the understanding breaking over his face that he had been disarmed days ago gently, and never once felt it leave. "You spent yourself keeping my men from carrying guns into this room," Corwin said to him. It was good work, Callan. You only forgot that the woman who kept the books knew which linen company had never washed a sheet. He did not signal his men. Sit down. You bled for my father once. That buys you a chair and a long conversation later, and not the floor. Sit. Callan sat. Warwick Haldane had gone the color of the orchids, but it was Ambrose who moved. Ambrose who stepped forward with his hands spread and his voice gone soft and reasonable. The voice of 30 years of counsel. Corwin. Corwin, listen to me. Whatever she has told you, you must understand the position I was in. Warwick would have taken the family in blood if I had not steered it into ink. I did this to spare you. I did this to spare all of us. I have protected this family since before you could hold a spoon. You took from the widow's fund, Corwin said, line by line. For a year, you sold the river to the man who buried the last 3 families foolish enough to shake his hand. And you sat at my table at Christmas and called me son. He let the silence do its work in front of all those watching faces. Every powerful man in the city who would carry the story out of this room by nightfall. You called her a hand that files and does not read. She read you down to the bone, Ambrose. Everything you are ends tonight, in this room, and it ends because the one person you never once bothered to see saw all the way through you. He did not do it himself, and he did not do it there. He gave a small motion, and Sten's men closed around the old man, and Ambrose Kester was walked out of the Lark Hall between them, still talking, his warm voice climbing and cracking, and the tall doors shut on the sound of it, and that was the last that bright room ever saw of him. Ondine had not spoken through any of it. She stood over the ruin of her father's patient life with her ivory composure fracturing at the edges, and when Corwin's eyes found her she lifted her chin the way she had lifted it 2 days before, ownership giving way to something colder and more honest. You were never going to sign, she said. It was not quite an accusation. It was almost respect. No, Corwin said. I stopped being for sale the moment I understood what I already had. He did not look at the north wall when he said it. He did not need to. He turned last to Warwick, whose patient lifetime had emptied out of him in the space of 90 seconds. You came a long way for a river, Corwin said. Get up. You and your daughter are going to walk out of my city on your own legs, which is a mercy I am extending exactly once, and only because a room full of men is watching me be reasonable. Go home to the north and tell them what happens to men who mistake my quiet for weakness. And Warwick, the next time you send men up a dark staircase to put their hands on a woman of mine, I will not send you home to tell anyone anything at all. He set the pen down on the unsigned accord and walked out of the room, and behind the north wall, a woman with a black book against her chest let out a breath she had been holding for 11 days. They did not speak on the drive back. Marin sat with the book in her lap, and her hands finally still, and Corwin drove with the cold, clean city sliding past the glass, and the quiet between them was not the old quiet of the corridor. It was the quiet of 2 people who have carried the same weight to the same place, and set it down together at last. She had been ready, on that drive, for him to become again the man she had served, now that the danger was behind them, to fold the tenderness away, with the crisis that had loosed it and set the desk back between them. She had braced for it, as she braced for everything. It did not come. He glanced at her at a red light, once, only to be sure she was still breathing and still there, and something in the plain, unhidden worry of it told her that, whatever had cracked open in that cold little room was not going to close back over. The gray-haired woman had food waiting, and a fire, and Corwin set Marin in the deep chair by the hearth, and crouched in front of it, and built the flames higher than the room needed, because he had seen where she lived, and he did not think he would ever again be able to bear the thought of her being cold. It is over, she said. She said it the way a person tests a word in a language they have only ever read and never spoken. The worst of it, he agreed. Warwick will run. Callan will talk, and there will be a long, unpleasant season of cleaning house after what Ambrose let rot. But no one is coming up a staircase for you again. That part is over. He looked into the fire. What? Tomorrow I send men to bring him in, gently, and put him somewhere safe and warm and his own, and pay for it out of the family, where it always should have come from. You are done buying his life 1 month at a time with your own. You will see him if you want. You have kept a man alive for 6 years, and never let yourself stand in the same room with him for fear of leading trouble to his door. You can stop being afraid of that too. For all those years the boy had been a secret. She carried like a stone swallowed whole, a life she had bought, with her own comfort and her own safety, and could never acknowledge, not to him, not even to herself, out loud, that Corwin knew of him now, and had not flinched and had reached past the crime of it to the mercy underneath, was a thing she had no framework to hold in the world she came from. Mercy was a liability you buried. He was treating it like the best thing she had ever done. Perhaps, she thought, for the very first time, it had been. She pressed the heel of her hand to her mouth, and this time, when the tears came, she did not fight them, and she did not apologize for them. And that was its own kind of healing. After a while, she reached out of the old habit that would take longer than a night to break, for the book, to open it, to find the next thing that needed doing. Because there was always a next thing, and the work was the one country where she had ever felt safe. Corwin caught her hand before it reached the cover. Not to stop the work, only to hold it. No, he said, not tonight, and not the way you mean. Listen to me, because I am going to lay this down only once. He turned her hand over in his, the small hand with the healing wrist, and looked at it as though it were the most valuable thing the family owned, which he had come to understand it was. For 6 years you stood at the corner of my desk, and I called you my archivist, and I let the whole city believe you were a woman who files paper. You are not going back to that corner. Not because you have earned better, though God knows you have, because I have finally understood what you are, and I will not spend the rest of my life pretending otherwise to keep the arrangement tidy. What am I, then? She whispered. It was the question beneath every silence of all those years, and she had never had the courage to ask it. You are the memory of this family, and its conscience, and the only voice in it I will ever trust to tell me the truth, when the truth costs me something. He lifted her hand, the bound wrist, the mark of every quiet blow she had taken and swallowed and hidden from him, and he bent his head and pressed his mouth to it, gently, over the bandage, a slow and deliberate thing, an apology and a vow at once. And you are done being the woman no one sees. From tonight your word carries as far as mine does. When you speak, this family listens, because for 6 years it lived on your silence, and never knew it. That is over, I would rather hear you. She thought of every morning she had said, as you like Mr. Rask, and swallowed whatever true thing was in her mouth, because the true thing was not her place, because her place was the corner and the silence and the perfect, unremarkable service that kept her invisible and therefore safe. She thought of how much of a life she had folded down into that one small flat phrase, and she understood that he was not offering her a better post. He was offering to undo the bargain she had made with her whole self long ago, the bargain that said the only way to survive powerful men was to become furniture in their houses. He was telling her she could set the furniture down and stand up inside her own life. It was the most frightening thing anyone had ever offered her. There was a knock. Sten at the door, with a phone in his hand and an unfamiliar expression, something close to awe. Boss. It is Warwick, from the road out of the city by the sound of it. He wants to speak to you. He is. Sten paused. He is asking for terms. Corwin took the phone. He did not raise his voice. He never had needed to. You are alive because a room full of men watched me let you live, he said into it. Those are the only terms you get. The city is mine. Your daughter is free of a debt arrangement and free of me, and you are free of the notion that quiet men are safe men. Do not write to me. Do not send men. Do not say my name in the north, except to warn the young ones what it costs to reach for it. If I hear that you have, I will stop being reasonable, and you have seen tonight how little separates my reasonable from the other thing." He handed the phone back to Sten without waiting for an answer. The way a man hangs up on weather. For 15 years, he had made the city believe he was a businessman. He was finished pretending. He did not have to raise his voice to end a dynasty. He only had to mean it, and every soul on the far end of that line could hear that he did. Then he turned back to the woman by the fire, and the hardness went out of him all at once, the way it only ever did now in front of her. "You should rest," he said. "For real this time. There is no signing in the morning. There is no accord. There is only a house with too many empty rooms in it, and a fire, and a great deal of nothing at all that you are required to do." Marin looked at him, this violent and dangerous man, made suddenly, carefully, gentle, kneeling in the warm light, as though she were the still point. The whole tilting room turned around. She thought of all those years of standing in shadow, of making herself small and silent and safe, of the terrible loneliness, of watching over everyone and being watched over by no one. His name out loud, on purpose, for no reason but that she wished to say it. It came out steadier this time, not a plea flung up out of the dark, but a word chosen and set down on purpose, the way she set down a figure she was sure of. "Yes," he said. "I think," she said slowly, testing each word the way she tested a column, "that I would like to learn how to be seen." He did not smile. Quite. He did not need to. He simply took the book gently from her lap and set it aside, closed, for the night, and stayed there in the firelight beside her, keeping the watch, the way he had promised, the way he meant to keep it for the rest of both their lives. She did not reach for the book again. For the first time in 6 years, she let a thing lie unfinished on a table and did not feel the world tilt for it. She let herself be a person in a warm room instead of a hand that files paper. She let herself, at long last, be seen. For 6 years, she had kept the truth in perfect silence. In the end, it took one whispered word in the dark to bring an empire down, and a man on his knees to finally hear it. That is what the quiet ones are worth. When someone thinks at last to listen, everything. If you have ever been the quiet one in the room, the one who sees everything and gets thanked for none of it, then you already know why Marin Alder is the most dangerous person in this whole story. So do her one small kindness and let her know she was seen. Leave a like if her silence landed somewhere real. Subscribe if you want more stories where the overlooked ones turn out to hold all the power. And tell me in the comments the exact moment you knew Corwin had stopped being a businessman and become a weapon. I read every single one. I will see you in the next story.